Well, I trust we are all ready for a holly jolly Christmas. I only heard one. That's not bad. I only heard one like, I'll ask again on December 15th, and we'll see how we're doing then. And honestly, that was as Reverend Nhien, Reverend Diana, and I were talking about what we wanted to do with this panel, how we wanted this service today to go. That was one of the key things that kept coming up, is that throughout the entire year, but especially at this time of year, there's so much that we feel like we have to do when we put stress on ourselves, and then those people in our community that are in recovery find themselves being drawn maybe to triggers, and what we have all experienced in our lives is that when we take time to really engage in that contemplative practice, it's not that those things don't exist, those stresses don't exist, those triggers don't happen. What happens is that we're able to utilize our spiritual practice to move through them. And so that's really what inspired this day. Now, as you know, we have 3 different ministers here today. And so what that means is that there are 3 vastly different perspectives on what exactly a contemplative practice can mean, how it works, and how it has had meaning in our lives. So I have had the opportunity to work with these wonderful ministers for several years now. Reverend Nhien and I went to school together. Reverend Diana and I have been all over the place doing classes and workshops and meditating together for years. I have been blessed by them in my life, and I know they will be a blessing to you as well. So I'd like to invite them to come on up and join us up here. And as they're making their way up, I wanted to just share a quote that jumped out at me as I was looking for this. This is from Joel Goldsmith's The Art of Meditation. And it's on page 25 when Joel wrote, "Contemplation lifts our consciousness into an atmosphere of receptivity, into a consciousness where miracles take place." And so no matter how it is that you engage in this practice, you'll find as we talk and as you read, there is no one right way to engage in a contemplative practice. But the ultimate goal is that we raise our consciousness, we raise our spirit, we raise ourselves up to that level. So welcome to both of you. And as we were talking earlier, Diana, you were sharing a story with us that I felt was really powerful. Would you want to? I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and just say you shared a personal story with us. Would you share it with all of them? But
well, thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm honored to share. I'm just so thrilled to be here and sharing about contemplative practices and how my spiritual practice has supported my journey. One of the things that I learned about a spiritual practice is that it is not necessarily something that helps us to feel a sense of peace all the time. It's not necessarily something that's going to have us feeling comfortable. It may even stir the pot a little bit, may stir us up. 2 years ago, about this time, just before the winter solstice, I was at the office, just as we all are, celebrating and enjoying the holiday goodies. In fact, I had hired a baker to make some Christmas cookies, and I'll share her name with you after the service if you'd like. She makes these beautiful decorated trees and little gifts, lovely, lovely Christmas trees, lovely Christmas cookies that were meant for me to give to someone else. And many of them I did deliver and shared with other people, but one afternoon I broke into those cookies and ate far more than I intended. In fact, I had not intended to eat any of them. And I was so disappointed in myself. I was so frustrated. I was at the end of my rope, but I didn't let myself drown in my tears this time because that's what I had done before. This time, I said I was at the end of my rope, right? I tied a knot at the end of my rope, and I hung on, and I swung out, and I just let go. Absolutely let go into free-form surrender. I said a prayer that was different from any prayer I have ever shared before, and my prayers in the past had been something like, "Oh God, please, I would really like to lose weight. I'm intending to lose weight. I'm going to feel good in this body, and I still want to be able to have pizza, Mountain Dew, and all those things that I really like." I thought I should be able to, but what I realized was that I had this list of exceptions. a list of areas that I wasn't able to let go or wasn't willing to truly surrender. So I surrendered everything. That was it. It was the biggest prayer I think I've ever prayed, to surrender everything I had thought about food and my body, my relationship with food, my attitudes, my beliefs. I just surrendered all. And I allowed myself to step into a new way of living, mindful eating. And like Myrtle Fillmore did in her journey of sitting in the silence and speaking to the cells of her body, I utilized the Unity teachings. And the very next day at work, which would have been the winter solstice, the day that it's the darkest day and then turning into more light, so it was very symbolic for me, I said, well, then what am I going to eat? You know, now what? Here I am at work, and I'm not going to eat more cookies, evidently, because I just swore off them. And I was guided to eat lower carbs and almost no sugar. And I never thought I'd be one of those people that said, I don't do sugar. But it gave me a mental clarity. It gave me a sense of peace, a sense of lightness, a sense of hope during that holiday season. And over the course of the next year, I just allowed that to spill over into every aspect of my life.
So did you find, first of all, thank you for sharing that. Did you find that after you'd had your prayer experience and after you had surrendered, that you had an easier time navigating through so when the page goes out or there's donuts in the conference room, was it easier for you to move through that trigger if you were stressed?
I really, really felt like a different person, and I had never had that experience before. I think there was something about the bigness of that prayer, the allness of it, the letting go of anything that Diana thought should happen or could happen. And so I felt different. I wasn't sure exactly how it happened, but I did. I felt very different. It felt lighter, and it was very, very much easier to move through that.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey.
Hi. I was just looking at you because I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add or ask or clarify.
I'd love to. I mean, I just have a very sort of visceral, touched response to Diana's share. Even though we had heard the outline right before stepping onto this platform, as Diana shared, I was struck by there is such a sense of tenderness in what you said, about yourself and your stance. And it reminded me of how, in Unity, we had this thing of we are all powerful, right? And I believe that is fundamentally true. But there is, that's our divinity, and there is this piece of our humanity, that I feel also needs to be honored too. And that when we honor both, there's this space of vulnerability in which we open to that strength and that light that is us. And hearing your story actually reminded me, I'm there are people in my life who can't even fathom. There was a time in my life when if I was in a classroom of 10 people, I couldn't speak because I was so shy. And I speak before thousands of people now, but there was a time when I would be so scared to speak in a room of 10 people, I'd just be shaking like this. And actually, as I was getting ready to step onto the platform, I remember, when I saw Terry and Dale come up, there was in my head this I wonder what goes on in their heads before they come up and speak. And I was reminded of Anne Lamott, who once said essentially this recovery, wonderful author. She said that my mind is like a bad neighborhood that I would never go into alone.
Amen.
Right. And it struck me, I was that has been my mind for the bulk of my life. And so that actually just segues into so my core story of the way that I've struggled the most is I've just been a meanie to myself. Like all of my life, I couldn't handle being alone for most of the years of my life. And I realized because to be alone with my own head was horrifying, that I had such a strong inner critic that if I were to present anywhere, there'd be this voice of just like, oh my God, you're gonna say something stupid. Oh my gosh, just this voice that would just beat me up. And so contemplative practice for me was so much about the tenderness of surrendering who I thought I was. Because that critic is designed to defend your identity, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I have to think of myself as a competent being, and heaven forbid there be evidence to the contrary, And so there's this tenderness that surrenders that. And for me, as we talked about here, the Enneagram teaching helped me to see, actually, I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram. What does that mean? That means that type is specifically oriented toward perfectionistic critical thinking. And the surrendering of that, once we've owned it, begins this path of coming into, hey, you might suck, but you can still love yourself, right? Like, it doesn't guarantee, that you're going to be good up there, but you will be soft with yourself, no matter what you do. And like that, to me, is the spiritual freedom and the power that we teach here in Unity. So, thanks, Brandon.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing, to be able to get to that place of letting go where you can honestly say, well, that was horrible, but I'm still okay. I have certainly had experiences that I never want to go through again, but I know I'm still here and I'm still okay. And yeah, I think there is a lot of power in that. You mentioned the Enneagram just briefly. How has that shifted? You and I went through ministerial school together. How has that shifted your view of ministry and the work that you're doing, and that sort of, how has the Enneagram informed it and changed you as a minister?
My favorite topic. Okay, so the Enneagram for me has phenomenally changed my life. I first learned the Enneagram back in 2002, but I first learned it more through the psychological realm, and it wasn't till I married it with contemplative practice that it really began to transform my life. So I'll start with the end. The short version is, it has been the most transformative thing in my own personal life and the most transformational tool in my ministry, such that in September of this year, I had been an associate minister at Unity Temple on the Plaza, one of the flagship churches of our movement, slated to be the heir to that church. And I actually stepped down from my role so that I could do the Enneagram full time. And the reason I chose to do that is that I felt like this peace changes lives in ways that are so fundamental. Because here in Unity, we teach about, hey, release your limiting beliefs, right? Release your limiting beliefs, and you will be able to live your Christ potential. But what the Enneagram does is it gives a map overlay on, wow, there are 9 fundamentally different ways that we go awry, that we lose sight of our wholeness and perfection. And if I know my particular orientation, then I can actually recognize what my unique path is. And I'll even use Diana again, if you don't mind, as an example. So Diana and I talked about how she identifies with the type 7 on the Enneagram. Well, the vice, the habitual emotional pattern of the type 7 so happens to be gluttony. And what gluttony means is it's a little bit of everything, a little taste of everything. It's like there's a voraciousness with which that particular egoic structure approaches the world, as if inside it's barren. So I need to acquire from the outside in this hungry way. And so the beauty of watching and hearing about your integration is that what happens is when we start to realize that there's something in our structure that the pleasurable tasting of life is the way that the 7 tells itself that it's okay. And so when we recognize that, we can see how, oh, that's going to be harder for me to pull back from that than it might be for another type. So I can have compassion for that structure. But then I can go behind it and go, oh, wow. Well, it's because, as A Course in Miracles teaches, the ego's mantra is seek but do not find. Seek in the outer world, continually, keep doing it, but never find that sense of wholeness, fulfillment, to be actually fulfilled by what you eat, right? And so, but instead turning within, turning to the resource within and having yourself be filled up from the inside out. You know, sort of the soothing aspect to like the seven's orientation to acquire in the outside, you know, and so yeah, just the beauty of recognizing how your understanding of the Enneagram married to these unity principles of practices of silence and stillness and solitude, these things that bring us sort of back home into our center, you know, where we can be filled up. Yeah. So that's my short answer, believe it or not.
And, and the long answer happens at 12:30, right?
Yes. So yes. Oh, so I can share a little bit about what would happen, you know, if people were to come to the 12:30 service. So this idea, again, is that like, what if, you know, the person, like every morning we wake up and we think, oh, we're making these choices out of free will, right? Chances are it's actually a pattern that the Enneagram can map. And if I find that I'm habitually oriented to a pattern, like my one-ishness is going to be oriented toward criticism. What's wrong? What's wrong with you, Nhien? Like that orientation. So that means my day is going to be about fixing myself if I'm not conscious. And so what learning about the Enneagram can help each of us to do is like go, how does my type regulate my day and drive me in ways that are unconscious? I don't even know why I continually do these things that sabotage, like what I say I want in my greatest good. This names it so we can have power over it rather than it unconsciously driving our lives. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were talking, you know, the experience that I've had, as much as I can be aware of why I'm doing something and how I'm doing it, helps me move through whatever it is that I'm experiencing. And this is something, it actually happened to me yesterday. I'm a 9 on the Enneagram, which for those of you that don't know, that means you're a peacemaker. And so what that means for me, and you are not allowed to use this to your advantage now, is that I will strive to do as much as I can to make people happy, to create peace, to calm the storms, to stop the conflicts. Where I have to be careful in that is that what that can lead to is me running around doing everything that gets asked of me because I have to do it because I need to make these people happy because that's how I get my fulfillment out is everybody's happy around me. What happens is when you do that, your tank runs empty. And then you don't have the energy anymore to do what you need to do. And that's exactly what happened to me yesterday. I was trying to get all of this sort of stuff done. We had this presentation tomorrow. I at least wanted to kind of look like I knew what I was saying and not just sit here and stare at Nhien and Diane. I'm like, all right. So I was working on that, and we're trying to hang Christmas lights. And of course, you know what happens when you do that? There's one strand that does not light up anymore. So now you have to go to the store to get that. So you've got that at the store, and then you get home, and oh, the kids are asking you to do that. And things weren't going the way they should have been going. And before I knew it, I was frustrated. And I was angry. And I wound up just kind of pulling the lights off that I hadn't got the way I wanted, shoving them in the container, and I'll deal with it tomorrow, in not a very happy tone. Where I found the contemplative practice to be so helpful is because I had spent time that morning in stillness and silence and meditation. I was able to return to that. And I was able to marry that with the Enneagram to go, now why are you, well, you have no energy because you've been running around all day, because you were trying to make everybody happy. And you know, the funny thing about that was all in my mind. They were fine, whether I was doing it or not. My wife's sitting there going, what are you doing? We do that to ourselves. We put it all in our own mind like that. But when you have tools like the Enneagram or other sort of self-awareness practices that you can marry with your spiritual practice, that helps you know why I am doing this. And so when something triggers you, when you get frustrated, when you get upset, you can, first of all, take the moment and acknowledge that you're upset. I think you said something earlier, Nhien, about unity teaching how they can also serve as a roadblock. And I think that was the biggest roadblock I always faced with unity teachings, was the idea that we create our own reality. Well, if I'm experiencing something negative, well, I don't want to focus on it or think it or even call out that I'm experiencing pain, because then I'm going to get more pain, right? That's what it's teaching. What I realized was that I was wrong about that. Because what happens when you don't take the opportunity to feel what you're feeling, to be aware of what you're feeling, is we do that thing that we've been taught to do since we were to just shove it right down in there and ignore it. And it's harder to reconnect with spirit because your brain's sitting there going, no, you're upset. What I found yesterday was that if I could take the time to be upset, to be mad, to be angry, to realize that I'd done it to myself, and then to take the moment to just breathe, to reconnect, and then I was able to move on. You see, that's the power in a contemplative practice. And if you can marry that with the self-awareness and the Enneagram that you're able to give, it's a really powerful practice to have. So, yeah.
Wow. May I? Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Am I allowed to, Enneagram analyze that?
Sure, yeah, we've got, I'm also looking at the clock, because you give one minister a microphone and you're in trouble time-wise, you give 3 a microphone, and we'll be here till 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to do this on the spot, but again, the amazing thing about working with such conscious individuals, the type 9 on the Enneagram, people were like, oh, the peacemaker. And they were like, oh, well, they just don't like conflict, or they can't handle conflict. And some people can be judgmental when they're like, just take a stand when they're talking to 9s, when they're like constant peacemakers. The deeper understanding about the 9's need to be a peacemaker, it comes from the notion that type's orientation is based on having lost sight of a particular facet of unity, a face of God known as holy love. So this idea that, oh yes, the light shines, it's shiny, I'm positive, the world is sunshiny, but just not on me. And so the idea behind 9ness is like somehow I don't really matter, but if I merge with my environment, if I comply, if I accommodate, if I just blend in, if everything is just harmonious, and I just feel part of, and then somehow I matter. So it actually takes a tremendous amount of spiritual growth for a 9 to even recognize anger, to even own it and recognize it, and to be able to assert one's needs in that moment. I mean, that's actually the path that we work on when we work on with 9s, to be like, hey, to be able to see yourself distinct from your environment, if you will, and to take that stand and make space for your own selfhood, if you will. So it's just a powerful journey. Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead. You looked like you were moving the microphone, like you were ready to say something. Well, one of the things and we've got a little bit of time to do this, is you got to listen to all of us talk. But what we'd like to do is see if any of you had any questions for us. So I am going to set this microphone down, pick up this one, and I'm going to come out here. Do any of you have anything you would like to ask us about a contemplative practice, about the Enneagram? I would say about life in general, but that could be iffy. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask? No? That's always the fun. Oh, wait, yes. All right, here we go. All right. There we go.
So my question is, what do your daily meditative practices look like?
Thank you. Do you want to, Diana, do you want to go first?
Sure. My daily meditative practice is to sit in the silence. And also I lead the 5 p.m. meditation. I'll just go ahead and give a plug there. Often, Brandon and I both do, the 5 p.m. meditation that is hosted by Unity Village Chapel, which is in the art gallery just behind the community center if you'd like to join us at 5 p.m. I sit in the silence and I allow myself to just be present with whatever it is that arises, whether it is a physical sensation, a thought, or an emotion. And that practice of being with but not trying to fix or change or stuff or distract from, that's the practice. So if I can do that in meditation, if I can just be with, I think of it as the blue sky meditation, which you may be familiar with. If we think of our mind as a clear blue sky, and that the thoughts that we hold and the emotions and everything that our mind contains could be a cloud, it could be a storm, and just be present with it as it floats on by, then eventually that blue sky begins to be predominant in the mind, the clarity of the mind. And so that's one of my main spiritual practices, is to sit in the silence.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I practice something called centering prayer for about at least 2 20-minute sits a day, sometimes more. And what's interesting, so this method is basically choosing a sacred word, not using the word as a mantra, but using it merely as an anchor when I find that my thoughts are in Canada or something like that, you know? Like I've hopped onto the thought train and it's over there. But the core to the centering prayer practice that I found to be deeply, profoundly effective is that it's the practice of intentionally dying to who I think I am. So I enter into the sit, always like willing to surrender my false self so that the mystery, that silence can teach me who I really am. And so for me, for some people, I remember a day when like 120-minute sit sounded outrageous, you know, in our busy times. But for me, people who know me well think of me as one of the most productive human beings they've ever known. And I know for me that the more I sit, the more that when I move from that center, my movement isn't compulsive, then it's not excessive, then it's only what is needed and what's mine to do. Movement, speech, action becomes clear from that place of groundedness. The more I sit, the more effective and the more loving I am. So that's my primary practice. And there are others that I'll actually be teaching a few at the retreat.
Wonderful. Yeah, and my practice has been I was one of those people that chased practices for a long time. So I'd find something and be like, oh, that looks interesting. Let's go see how that works. And they're, oh, wait, that looks fun. Let's go do it. So I wouldn't even say I was an expert at many things and a master of none. I was like somewhat versed in a lot of things and an expert of absolutely none of them. But what finally worked for me was I spend a majority, maybe 30 or so minutes in silent meditation, not always with a question. If I don't have something that I'm going into the meditation with, what I go into the meditation with is to have a greater understanding of the presence of God in my life, and that's just what I'm focused on. And then I kind of match that with a conscious setting aside of myself and letting the presence of God take over. And what I find when I do that, when I spend that time in that meditation, what happens is when I get triggered later on in the day, really all it does take is and I'm recentered. So that's what's been powerful for me, is doing that. Anybody else want to make me one? Yes. Oh, wait, oh, yes. I'll get right back to you. All right. There you are.
Thank you. I'm Steve Newell, and I've been around Unity for a while. I was a Youth of Unity student senator in 1972 from the Des Moines Unity Center. And back in Uniteens, when I was 12, we went through the 7 major religions and finding the unity principles. I think we now refer to 5 unity principles. They're fairly apparent in all 7 of the major, which you would call maybe geopolitical religious groupings in our history around the planet that we know of. And at the end of it all in Uniteens, then in the circle it was, which do you buy, the Unitarian or the Trinitarian concept explaining the Christian theory? And I thought about it very carefully, and when we came back the next week, I told Mary Alice Brown that I was a Unitarian. And I was the only one in the circle there in Des Moines, Iowa that was. And I didn't know it at the time, but my grandmother said, yes. And my mom said to her some complaining things. But I didn't know that we were of Jewish ancestry on mom's side of the family. And Unity for me has been a home because it's a place that is a home for a lot of diversity in our human history that we have, that we carry with us, whether we knew it or not, that we carry with us. And amidst all of this, things like the anagram and these other self-awareness tools, they don't revise, as I understand it, they don't revise what unity at its core is and has been since the decision in 1889. One key thing about it has stayed the same no matter what our metaphysical research is developing for us. And I guess, do you understand my question? That's the question I have. Is that or is that not true as you find it? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. So my question, if I understand you right, is does the Enneagram not revise the core unity teaching
It's no violation to say.
Correct.
It's no violation to say I reserve the right to change my mind.
Correct.
Just about anything that I go through a course and training here, and I may like it for a while, but then again, I may later say, you know what? Part of that I personally disagree with, and I'm still in unity.
Correct.
Right? Yeah.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Well, you know the saying, everything but God is a metaphor, right? These are all just ways we point toward the experience of truth. And there are such diverse ways, you know, and I would have to say also a part of why I love the Enneagram is because it actually paints that for some people, my joke in my classes is that spiritual growth, for some of you, is about learning how to speak up. And for others, it's about learning how to shut up. You know, like that actually, based on your orientation, that there's a different path that you can make toward the knowing of that wholeness that is fundamental to all of us. Yeah. So thank you.
All right. Well, we're getting short on time, but Terry, did you have a question? Yeah.
I was wondering if any of you use journaling and specifically morning pages, and if you could speak a little bit about that or what a good way to get started would be.
I will let the two of if you do, because journaling was one of the things I tried for a while, and then I found out I was putting too much on myself to go do it, and it was no longer a helpful spiritual practice because I was putting too much stress on myself. Oh, I got to go journal now, and it wasn't effective for me, but I don't know if either of you.
I've been a journaler since I was about 15, and while I have taken the artist way and done the morning pages at several different points in my life, and I certainly do encourage that. My journaling practice is really more of one at the end of the day where I ask myself a few key questions, such as how did I use food today? How did I use power today? How did I express myself today? Was I clear today? What could I have done better today? How could I have shown up in a way that expressed my fullness and my authenticity? And just keep the questions pretty simple, and then from there just allow those answers to arise so that I can have that self-reflection, so that I can then look at, okay, if this is where I am, what are my goals and intentions for tomorrow? So that's how I use journaling.
Thank you. So I have done morning pages before. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's essentially committing yourself to writing like about 5 pages continuously without censoring it and without even needing to read it again. So in a way, for me, I have used it like a mind dump. And I do one-on-one counseling with folks, and it would be a very specific thing to recommend when, especially if you are the type to self-censor, if you are looking to find your truth, your knowing, and your voice. Oftentimes that kind of journaling in the morning is the way that you can just dump without censoring yourself, so that it's like you're clearing out room for that light to express. So I would recommend it more depending on what is alive for you at any given time. So, yeah.
All right, well, we're going to kind of bring our panel to a close. But before we do that, if you did have a question that you weren't able to answer, I know we will be around. We'll be happy to talk with you after the service. But Reverend Diana, where can they find you after this? Where can they connect you? You mentioned the Wednesday night meditations. How else can we experience more of your spiritual light?
I am available for counseling sessions here through Unity Village Chapel. I'm also active with Unity Arts Ministry. We have open studio on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. So also check out my website, revdianakennedy.com, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you more.
You all get to see me most every Sunday, but I do have coming up on December 18th, we're doing a class, All is Calm, All is Bright. That'll be a metaphysical interpretation of the Christmas stories. So if you want to join us for that, or join me for that, I'll be there. And then, of course, Reverend Nhien, how can we get more of your spiritual light?
Well, 12:30 today, you can come to the Enneagram workshop. EvolvingEnneagram.com is the name of my website. I just want to throw out that, we're all generally in our modern day super busy, and this is a particularly, quote, busy time of year. And this idea that more classes to go to, more things to get involved with, I'd like to back up from that and really invite you to consider that these sorts of events that are contemplative, that are ways of sort of building the opposite muscle of doing, building the muscle of being, building the muscle of presence that enables us to kind of wake up to the gift of life already here. And, in that, hopefully, if you feel called to attend today's workshop or Saturday's retreat, that is with the heart of saying, how can I build the resources and skills within myself to create spaciousness for me to receive the fullness of my life and who I am, not for something more I have to do, Gosh. So that's my prayer.
Amen.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for joining us this Sunday and sharing your wisdom with us.
Awesome to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for